Hi there, Fleetwood owners. Today in your 2019 Fleetwood Bounder, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install SumoSprings Maxim custom helper springs for the rear axle. We're about to do a complete suspension system overhaul here on our Bounder with a bunch of different upgrades. It's going to drastically improve its handling. But before we compare those, we're going to need to take a baseline. So we've done nothing to it right now. We've just got our stock Bounder. We're going to hit our test course. Then we're going to install the components and then re-hit the test course again. We're going to start by getting into our uneven bump section. This is going to be affected mostly by your sway bars and your airbags or jounce bumpers, those type of things. We've just got our factory components here, and you can feel we've got some good rocking. Sumo springs and sway bars definitely make a big difference in this area. All right, and now we're going to head into our just regular bump section. This is more just your forward and back, up and down movement. Now your sway bars aren't going to affect this too much, but you will see some benefits from your Sumo springs and that forward and aft movement. All of this is going to help make things in the back not rattle around so much. I can already hear some doors and things rattling back there. And lastly, we're going to go into the Slalom, which is where we'll mimic evasive maneuvers for any kind of emergency situation and how the motorhome would react. Right, we're getting ready to head into the Slalom section now. And here we go. Oh yeah, it definitely has some lean to it. It doesn't feel very comfortable when we're not even doing too evasive of a maneuver here, but it's a little bit more than I would want to go than what we're doing about right now. So if you had a situation where you really needed to slam it hard, you are at risk for potential rollover. But once we put on our Sumo springs and our sway bar and we head back out here on the course, I imagine we're going to feel drastic improvements on the body roll. And we're also putting a steering stabilizer on it. So during those evasive maneuvers, when you turn it left or right, that steering stabilizer is going to help us bring it back to center to help have more control over the motorhome. Here's some stuff rattling around in the back here, and boy, it really wants to roll. So I think that's about as much as I'm going to get on it here before we put the parts on. Now that we've got our components installed, we're going to take our Bounder back out on the test course and see how they compare to the factory suspension. We're going to first take it into our uneven bump section, and I can already notice a huge difference right here. The motorhome used to sway back and forth quite a bit when we went over the uneven bumps, but now it levels itself out very quickly and springs right back to upright when we go over our uneven bumps. Lastly, we're going to head down to our Slalom section of the course where we're going to perform some evasive maneuvers and see how that feels. And here we're going to head into the first turn, and I can already feel a huge difference. The motorhome doesn't sway nearly as much. I feel like I've got a lot more control over the motorhome. I can easily bring the motorhome to the left and to the right and back, and it comes upright without me having to correct it at all. And this is what our Sumo springs look like when they're installed. Sumo springs are going to help minimize sway, and they're one of many multiple components that you can install on your RV that can work together. Things that work with your Sumo springs to help further eliminate sway includes your rear sway bar, your front sway bar, a front set of Sumo springs, and for added control over the vehicle, a steering stabilizer. The Sumo spring installs between the frame and the top portion of your leaf spring here at the rear, right above the axle. It's positioned just in front of the axle here and is designed to compress up to 80%, absorbing any sway that you get. So as the vehicle wants to sway in this direction, the spring's going to want to compress, and then that compression is going to want to cause the spring to expand again, which is going to help keep the vehicle back upright and preventing it from swaying as much. This works with the one on the other side, so as it pushes the vehicle back up, the one on the other side is going to compress and push again to help it stay upright and not swaying back and forth. The springs also stretch up to 50%, so when it sways towards the passenger side, this one will stretch, and as it's stretching, it's actually pulling back down as well. So it works in both directions, both compression and expansion, to provide anti-sway assist. In addition to anti-sway, it does also help smooth out your ride, because whenever the suspension here in the back wants to travel, our Sumo spring is going to absorb some of that road shock. This can also help with forward and aft motion as well, if you've got some issues when going over rough terrain where your RV likes to tip forward and back. So what this means for you is you're going to have an easier time maintaining control of the vehicle because you're going to have less sway, so any of those crosswinds that you experience while driving or a big semi flies by you, you're not going to experience as much body roll and have to compensate for that at the steering wheel. This is going to lead to less white knuckle driving, so you'll have more energy when you get to the destination that you were planning on going to. You'll just feel more relaxed while driving because you're not going to be as scared of your motorhome because you're going to increase its stability. Your passengers are also going to like this because it's going to provide a smoother ride for them. In addition to your passengers enjoying it, all the items in your RV are also going to like it because your cabinet doors aren't going to be slamming open and closed as much or as hard as they were before, and it may potentially fully eliminate it. And it's also resistant against oils and road grime, so you don't have to worry about the material breaking down over time as you're driving your RV and using it as you normally would. The kit comes with everything you'll need to get it installed. There is some drilling required, but it's really not too bad as long as you've got the capabilities to get your RV lifted up and the wheels off. This shouldn't really be too much of a problem at home in your driveway. Let's go over the installation together so you can have the confidence to do it at home. We'll begin our installation by lifting the vehicle up so that way our axle's hanging so we can remove the wheels. You can use your leveling jacks to lift it up. Then you'll want to make sure you place some jack stands underneath the frame to support the vehicle because you don't want to just rely on your leveling jacks to hold it up. Once you get the wheels off, we can easily access the area that we're going to be working in. But before we put the Sumo Spring in, we're going to need to do a little bit of preparation on it. We'll start by taking our spring, and you'll have 4 threaded holes on the top of the spring. We're going to take our top bracket, and there's 2 holes in that. That's going to line up with the holes that are spaced farthest apart. We're just going to set it on just like this with the ears facing down to the sides of the spring. And we're going to use the shortest bolts that come in our kit to thread it into our spring. We'll then tighten it down using a 9/16 socket. We can then flip the spring over now. And on the bottom side, we're going to have a single hole where we'll take our lower bracket and we want the hooked end with the 2 ears facing away from the bottom of the spring. We'll line up the single hole with the single hole in the bottom of our spring, and we'll use the same size bolt to thread that on. Now this one we don't want to fully tighten down because we do need to be able to pivot this on the bolt to get it properly lined up. We can come in here with a wrench later on and finish tightening that down. We can now go ahead and set our spring into position. The lower bracket's going to sit on our leaf spring and the hook is going to be towards the rear of the vehicle, and it's going to hook around the U-bolt that's towards the front of the axle. The 2 ears on the front side of our lower bracket should fall down on each side of our leaf spring. And here you can see the hook wrapped around our U-bolt. We'll need our lower holes to be 6 inches from the top of the frame. So we will have to jack the axle up to reach that. But what I'm going to do beforehand is just go ahead and make a mark where that is. So we got our tape measure at the top of the frame there. And we come down 6 inches, and I'm just going to mark that right here on the outside of our spring so I know where 6 inches is. And we're going to do that over on the other side as well. Now we'll place a jack underneath the axle on the side we're working on, and we're just going to jack it up until the lower hole lines up with the marks we made on the frame. That's 6 inches from the top. And now that we've got it lined up right there at about 6 inches, we can go ahead and mark that hole. And then we can drill that out. I like to take the spring off and then drill it. It's just a little bit easier with the spring out of the way, so that's why I marked the hole. We'll now use a 3/8 drill bit to drill out the mark that we made where our hole in our Sumo Spring is going to be. We've got our hole drilled out here so we can put our spring back in place. And at this time too, we're also going to put our carriage bolts in because it's a little easier when we can move the spring around. So we're going to take the long carriage bolts and they drop down through these squares in the lower bracket. And again, since we can move the spring around, it does make it a little easier because they're kind of a tight fit to get it to squeeze by the spring there. Now that we've got those strapped down, make sure our hook is back in place and we're sitting properly on our leaf spring. And then we can slide the medium length bolt, this is the longest hex head bolt that comes in your kit, through the hole that we just drilled out and through our Sumo spring. And then on the other side, we're just going to thread on a locking nut. We can go ahead and leave it loose at this time because now we're going to have to jack up the axle further until the other side of our bracket's lower hole lines up with the mark we made that's 6 inches down from the top of the frame. So now we're just jacking up until that lower hole on the other side there lines up. Now that we've got that side lined up, we can go ahead and drill out that hole. This time we can just use our Sumo spring as a template. I am still going to make the hole marked with the paint stick, but we don't need to remove it or anything. We're just going to drill right on through with our Sumo spring in place. And then just like we've done on the other side, we're going to use the same hardware. We're going to slide our bolt through. We're going to start our nut on the other side. But this time we are going to go ahead and tighten these two down because it'll make it easier if our bracket is not vibrating around while we use it as a template to drill out the 2 remaining holes. Now there are 6 holes. There's 3 on each side, but we won't be using the top hole on either side. Now before you do any drilling through the frame, you should always check the other side. And after checking here for our upper holes, we are going to have to move this hose out of the way. This is just an exhaust hose for your rear differential. There's just a little clip here. We're just going to pull that clip off and set it down. We'll reattach it after we finish all of our drilling. While we're down here though, we can go ahead and tighten up our hardware. We'll be using a 9/16 socket and wrench to do so. Now upon further inspection here, the middle hole on the rear side of our upper bracket already partially lines up with a very large pre-existing hole in the frame. So while normally we were going to use this hole, we are going to move up 1 hole, and they had that extra hole there just in case this happens if it already lines up with the pre-existing hole. Since that hole is there, our hardware's not going to tighten down properly due to that. So we'll be using the top hole on the rear side. And on the front side we're checking, and since there's no pre-existing hole here, we can go ahead and use that hole that's right there. So we're just going to use our spring bracket as a template and then drill out those holes. Now that we've got our holes drilled out, we can slide our hardware through our brackets in the frame and secure a locking nut on the other side. Then we can go back and tighten down those bolts as well. We can then put the clamp bracket on the bottom of our lower bracket. We're going to take the clamping bracket and slide it on our carriage bolts that we slid down. Let's just line up the 2 holes in it and slide it on. Then we're going to use locking nuts to thread onto the bottom of each of our carriage bolts. We can then go back and tighten down our carriage bolts. And you want to go back and forth to make sure you tighten them down evenly. So once you get it threaded up to where it touches the leaf spring, we're going to hop to the other side. We'll then repeat all the same processes on the other side to get that Sumo spring installed. You can now take the jack out from underneath the axle, put your wheels back on, let the vehicle back down, you're ready to take it for a test drive. If everything's working properly, your installation's complete. And that completes our installation of SumoSprings Maxim custom helper springs for the rear axle on our 2019 Fleetwood Bounder.